I am here today with Dr. Yosef, who is a medical practitioner. He is a psychiatrist, and he's kind of out of
Mhm.
the, I guess what you would say is traditional psychiatry. You actually help people taper off of psychiatric medications. And today we're going to be talking about cannabis induced psychosis. We'll talk about medication related treatments for it and kind of what you've been experiencing with individuals who are struggling with cannabis induced psychosis and what that looks like. For those of you who enjoy today's conversation, I'm going to put links in the video description and pinned
Mhm.
comment to Dr. Yosef's YouTube channel and his website, taperclinic.com. Thank you for spending some time with me today to talk about this topic.
Dr. Frank, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I appreciate it. So let's jump right into things. Tell me, do you think cannabis induced psychosis is a problem? Do you think this is a growing problem? And have you seen cannabis induced psychosis in clinical practice? Let's just start there.
Yeah. So it is a big problem. It is a growing problem, and I'd like to start with why it's such a big problem. So, from my vantage point, I'm a psychiatrist who helps people come off psychiatric medications. Now, one of the reasons people will come to me is that they've been misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia because of their cannabis use, and so what I usually see is that someone will use cannabis, and particularly high potency cannabis products. They'll have a manic or a psychotic episode that will be severe. It won't be short lived. It won't be something that goes on for a couple days. It'll be something that maybe happens for like a month or two, and with lingering psychosis afterwards. The doctors will tell them that the drug use has unmasked a psychotic disorder for them, and then they'll put them on antipsychotics, and they end up on them for potentially indefinitely. I mean, many people look at things like bipolar and schizophrenia as lifelong psychiatric problems, and so it's very easy to have a temporary problem with cannabis all of a sudden turn into lifelong commitment on psychiatric medications unnecessarily, and all of the side effects that go along with that. And Frank, one of the reasons why it's more of an issue these days is that the cannabis products, the potency of them has gone way up, and there's legalization in many different states. People view cannabis as medicine a lot of the times. And just like how we have in psychiatry, where there's a big industry that sort of overhypes the benefits and minimizes the harms of the medications, I think big cannabis as well may be doing something similar, where there's just this feeling out there that cannabis not a big deal. Cannabis is medicine, and I think people really don't realize how quickly it can turn into a nightmare, and ending up on all these meds.
Do you think a lot of physicians are up to speed with this? Because something that I see all the time is someone will reach out to me and they'll say, my son is struggling with a cannabis substance use disorder. It's usually a parent. And they'll say, my son is also bipolar,
Mm.
but he's being properly medicated now for that. So, we want to start proceeding on working on the cannabis substance use. And in my mind, one of the first things I usually think in my head is your son actually bipolar? Or was this induced from cannabis use? And now, exactly as you said, is he set up for a lifelong continuation of needing, bipolar related medications and things like that? So is that the scenario that you're describing?
Yeah. Exactly. And what I would say is if you've been using cannabis products and you've been diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia, um, there is a very good chance you don't have bipolar or schizophrenia. I mean, and you're suffering from a drug-induced mood instability or psychosis. And yes, maybe it will still be there when you remove the cannabis. That's always a possibility, but you will never know unless you come off and you stay off for a period of time. One of the YouTube channels that I really like, it's totally underappreciated, and it's a gem, is the Every Brain Matters YouTube channel. And it talks a lot about people recovering from cannabis-induced psychosis. Listen to some of these stories. These people are taking years to recover sometimes. They'll say they come off, and then for a year afterwards, they're still not quite themselves, and they're still noticing improvements 2 years later. Now, that's not everyone. Most people will recover from the psychosis fairly quickly. But if you do really poorly on it, and for whatever reason that is, maybe a genetic susceptibility, you can take it can take a long time to really bounce back from that, and you still will have mood instability once you've come off, and you sort of need to stick with it until your brain recovers, and then you can come off the medications then.
Okay, and this brings up another really interesting thought that Every Brain Matters is a fantastic YouTube channel. They are a fantastic non-for-profit that helps people with cannabis. Very familiar with them. How would you say, because cannabis isn't the only drug or substance that can cause or lead to psychosis or be a risk factor for it, how would you say the recovery from a cannabis-induced psychosis stacks up to maybe some other common drugs that cause psychosis? Is the recovery just really dependent upon the person and their environment and their care team and their genetics or whatever? Or would you say cannabis induced psychosis maybe lingers a little bit longer than psychosis induced from some other substance?
So there hasn't been any longitudinal studies that kind of measure the recovery from cannabis-induced psychosis. But my guess would be that cannabis-induced psychosis is more severe than psychosis from other things. And that's because when we look at, there was a big registry study of what happened to people after they had different drug-induced psychoses. And I talked about this on a video I did on my YouTube channel not so long ago about cannabis. And they looked at the statistics with respect to how many people who had a substance-induced psychosis would go on to develop like schizophrenia or bipolar. And there was percentages, and cannabis was the drug. Cannabis-induced psychosis was the condition that was the most likely to have someone go on to develop schizophrenia, bipolar. I think it was nearly 50% of people, if they had a cannabis-induced psychosis, would go on to get that diagnosis. Now, that was really surprising for me because I always thought methamphetamine was worse. But when you look at methamphetamine, it's down in like the 30% range. When you look at, you also look at psychedelics, things like LSD, that was even lower. Cocaine was even lower than that. And then so what that means to me is that there is something about cannabis that is particularly bad for people when it comes to psychosis and converting, and essentially developing symptoms that will be misdiagnosed as bipolar or schizophrenia. And so based on that, my assumption would be that the psychosis is nastier and it goes longer, just because it more frequently converts. And so I'd say that would be my best guess.
And do we know why? Is there any good understanding as to why cannabis is causing psychosis? Like the physiology of it, if that's the correct term. Why does cannabis cause psychosis in a person to develop?
So on a biological level, I'm not sure what's going on, but what I do know is that drugs. I mean, it has to be something about the THC or the drug in and of itself. Cannabis, I mean, one of the other reasons is cannabis may be used a lot more frequently by people because it's accepted. And there's this whole culture about cannabis, being a medicine and being safe and really not a big deal. So some of it might just be how socially acceptable it is to use it. I mean, when I'm in San Francisco, I was recently there, someone ripped a bong like on the street in front of me, just like holding like a full on glass bong just to, and
Yes.
I mean, that was kind of crazy, but what we do know about chronic exposure to drugs is that it's harmful to the brain. And this happens with everything. I mean, when we look at people who use a lot of methamphetamine, they're more likely to convert to psychosis. That has to be due to brain changes. We see it in cannabis. We see it in people who are chronic alcoholics. They develop a form of dementia called Wernicke-Korsakoff, which is irreversible. And then we see this with psychiatric medications as well. Chronic exposure to antipsychotics causes permanent movement disorders called tardive dyskinesia. This is the thing that you see with the Joker in the Batman movies, where his mouth moves and his tongue twitches. And, it's a sign of the neurological damage from the antipsychotics. It happens with benzodiazepines like Xanax and Klonopin. It happens with lithium. Every time we look at drugs that people take on a consistent basis, um, um, it does lead to neurological harm over time. I mean, our brains are really finely calibrated. They should not be getting bombarded with, powerful substances. It will cause these changes. And so while I don't know exactly what is happening on a level, I do know that, cannabis, it causes psychosis. It does lead to neurocognitive deficits when they look at what happens to adolescents who smoke a lot of cannabis and how they perform later. There's deficits there as well. And then just broadly among drugs that are used on a daily basis, there are a proportion of people who will go on to develop neurological problems as well. So
Yes.
that's what I think is going on.
I'm sure that's accurate. And then, there's the whole conversation of the endocannabinoid system and how that's becoming potentially dysregulated, and maybe that plays a role. You said adolescence, though, and this brings me to another thing too. I do a lot of work in high schools, and here in the United States, violence in schools is a very scary factor. School shootings, things like that. Okay. And I have come across so many documented episodes of cannabis induced psychosis involving violence that I it's overwhelming to see. And this is never talked about. I interviewed another PhD gentleman on my channel about this. Have you seen this with cannabis induced psychosis often being related to acts of violence?
Yes, yeah, and I can't say that I've seen a lot of these cases myself. I do have some patients, then they tell me about things that they've done in the past when they were using a lot of cannabis, and they may have, attacked their parents, or they've done things that they've gone on to regret. But then I hear these. I mean, the big one was the story out in Colorado. There was a woman who fatally stabbed her boyfriend, almost, I think it was like hundreds of times after she
Correct.
ripped a bong, and then she developed this really horrific psychosis where she thought she was being persecuted, and she thought that like hell had opened up, and she had to kill this guy to save herself, and she tried to take her life afterwards. And so there's stories like that. But then I also go on I'm going to talk about it again, the Every Brain Matters YouTube channel. And they describe a type of manic psychosis, which is really, which does appear to be quite consistent. I mean, if you're looking for types of signatures that kind of happen, you can see one here. They start to become very grandiose, very paranoid, and they become aggressive as well. And so you have this sort of delusional mania and paranoia together. And when you're in that state, you can be really violent or aggressive. And so, yes, I mean, I absolutely do think that there's something about the type of psychosis that people develop on cannabis that can lead them to be violent.
When
I
you
mean, what have you
mentioned
seen, Dr. Frank? Tell me about some of the stories that you've heard about.
Probably similar to what you have, because I've used the same resource as Every Brain Matters, but I was working with one family specifically out of Canada, and they had a young daughter, and it was actually, this kind of crazy. Two things. They had a daughter who was struggling with cannabis use, and there was definitely a lot of like, I guess I'll say mental instability there. And she had contacted me at one point out of the blue, telling me that she had to kill her parents. And she was actively in the process of doing that. She had a knife and she was ready to go. I'm in the United States. I had never dealt with a scenario like that before. I had to get in touch with the parents and say, listen, your daughter is somehow coming from where she's at with a knife to kill you guys because she believes you are demons. And she is absolutely on her way. And she was on her way. Luckily, the police were there. Luckily, the police were forewarned that she was in an acute state of psychosis. So they were able to de escalate it because, and this is nothing about police violence or anything, but like she was a very real threat when she showed up to their house. And that could have ended very, very tragically if no one had known what was going on. So I've seen that. I had another parent contact me where it was kind of out of the blue. Her daughter was driving in the car. We were working with her on cannabis substance use, and they were on a throughway or a road, and before the mom knew it, the daughter was saying, listen, we both have to die. This is the end, whatever type of psychotic episode she was having. And she had brought that car up to 100, 110, 115, 120 miles per hour, saying she was about to drive off the road. And I had actually spoke to another gentleman about this, and he was like, the car violence is also like automotive related violence is another thing that he had seen a lot in cannabis induced psychosis, which I found interesting because I hadn't really heard that before. Those are probably two of the more extreme examples that pop into my mind.
Mm.
I personally struggled with, I'll say, an acute episode of psychosis. And it was many of the symptoms that you described. It was this very grandiose personality. I thought I was this big business Mongol, and I thought I was doing all these big things in business and healthcare. And I wasn't. I was at that time living in my mom's house, like in a spare bedroom. And I had the not what I thought. I actually thought I was the Pablo Escobar of business. I was like, we're gonna start taking over these other healthcare, and I was like, who knows what was going on in my head. And I had the paranoia, right? The paranoia was just getting insanely bad. I also had at the time, if you look back to my very early YouTube videos, I had glasses, and I wasn't very upfront with my healthcare providers about what I was doing. But like I was seeing what I described as, I was like, I'm seeing flashes and I'm seeing things and there's stuff happening in my eyes. So I'm seeing all these different opticians and optometrists and ophthalmologists, and they're like, we don't know, but like your eyes look good. We're just going to give you a pair of glasses so you get out of our office. And that was essentially what was concluded. Upon quitting cannabis, a lot of that went away. When I had that, I guess I'll say psychotic episode, manic episode, I don't know what the proper terms would be. I was up for almost 72 hours straight and just literally losing my mind. And my poor mother was left to deal with that. This is going back several years ago now. But so that's my experience. That's my personal experience and some other things I've seen. I'm particularly worried about violence in the high school, though, in the high schools, because I work with a lot of kids. I work in a lot of high schools, and I get very, very concerned about that. And if you look at some of these autopsies of active shooters, shootings, cannabis is often identified in those autopsy reports. In some cases, there's other substances. In some cases, there's not. And they just brush it over. They're like, the only drug present was THC, almost as if like that wasn't it. But it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe we should pay attention to that a little bit. So
yeah, totally. I mean, you're speaking to this the cultural narrative that cannabis is not a big deal, but this is not the cannabis from back in the days. I mean, this is the designer drug cannabis, that's super potent. There's like dabs and shatter, and things like synthetic THC products as well. I mean, this is crazy stuff. I mean, these things can be really potent. But what I want to ask people who are listening to this video, because oftentimes this is my favorite thing about YouTube videos, especially in this arena, is the comments below. If you have had a cannabis-induced like psychosis or a violent episode or anything like that, please share it below this video so me and Dr. Frank can go and read it afterwards. Give us the details of it, the texture of it, because this is actually, it's helpful for us and for other people to kind of know more about like what it feels like. I mean, we're talking a lot about mania, grandiosity. I've also heard some people describe feeling like they're in hell, which means that they must have been in a state of such extreme anxiety, torturous anxiety and hopelessness and despair. And so I also think that some people, when they have these psychotic episodes, something is propelling them to be like, oh, I have to get out of hell. I have to kill these demons. The only thing I could imagine, it must be this insane state of anxiety, which would be hard to describe. But if it has happened to you or someone that you know, please write about it below so we can learn, so everyone can learn from it.
Yes, one of the most helpful things on these channels is the community support in the comments. So I'm really glad that you brought that up in relating to others. I want to ask you another question while we're on this topic. Are there risk factors that can predispose a lot of people? And I've seen it both ways. A lot of people say, no, cannabis only causes that if you have risk factors. And I've seen perfectly, I believe that case that you brought up of that young lady who stabbed her boyfriend several times, she had no pre-existing risk factors. I'm very familiar with that story. She did not have any prior mental health diagnoses. But are there risk factors that can lead to a cannabis induced psychosis that people should be aware of? For example, if someone takes Adderall, a lot of people I know that take Adderall use cannabis. Are they at a higher risk of uh, developing psychosis potentially?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because now I can think of three things. I mean, the first one would be if you're taking stimulants. I mean, you're going to be more likely to slip into a psychosis, because I mean those drugs do that. In and of themselves, Adderall, Ritalin, right there on the drug label, can cause mania, can cause psychosis, and so we have this sort of compounding effect. When you have two things, it will increase the risk. The biggest one that I see mostly is age. The younger you are, the more likely you are to have a cannabis-induced psychosis. And we see this with a lot of other drugs as well. Our nervous systems are maturing way into our 20s. I mean, it doesn't just end when you're 18. The way our brains work, I mean, our serotonin systems, all of that we know in humans. I mean, it's well into your 20s, possibly even up to 30s before the full maturation is finished. There's something about messing with that system while it's maturing that causes more problems. And they see it in cannabis, but they also see it in antidepressants. Some people may have heard before that these drugs can increase the risk of suicidal behavior, and that's true. And the risk is particularly a problem in people who are under age 25. And so there's something about the immaturity of the nervous system when it gets exposed to drugs. There's this higher risk. And the next thing that I would say is how you've responded to cannabis previously. Now, I often talk about paradoxical reactions. Like, let's say, for instance, you're with a bunch of your friends, 10 people are, smoking a joint, 9 people are sort of giggling and they're having a good time, they're relaxed. And you start to feel kind of self-conscious, anxious, maybe a little bit paranoid, but you feel like you need to keep on going because you want to be cool and you want to, fit in with your friends. You don't want to be ostracized. Everyone else, it's working for everyone else. Cannabis is not for you. I mean, that is the sign already that that your brain is not really adapted to that drug, and if you were to push it further, you would be the person that would have like a mania or a psychosis. And so I also think how you respond is important, and then obviously huge amounts. Like if you're someone who can smoke weed like a champ, if you are smoking a lot of it, we do notice that there's a 4-fold increase in the chance of developing a psychotic illness when you're using the higher amounts of it. And so that's kind of how I think of the risks of slipping into it.
Excellent. That's very helpful. And now I have another question as well on this topic. What are common treatments that people usually receive okay, someone has a family member or they themselves have been struggling with a psychotic manic episode. What happens? So they go to the hospital and what happens from there? How are things treated?
You might go to the hospital. If you're calm, they may just observe you for a few days without any medications. But if you're aggressive or you're paranoid or anything like that, you're going to get given an antipsychotic immediately. If you have a lot of grandiosity, you'll probably be put on a mood stabilizer like Depakote. And so that's mostly what happens. People, if they have a bad psychosis or a mania, they'll go in and get put on antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, and essentially they're just babysat until the psychosis starts to wear off, or usually until the insurance expires at about 7 days, and then you're kind of it's back home.
And once the psychosis starts to expire, let's say those medications are in fact effective at breaking it, is the person on those medications for a long period of time, or in some cases are they able to, and obviously people need to check with whatever treatment program they're on, but or are those meant to be lifelong medications after that, or no, not necessarily?
So most people will find that when they go into the hospital, no one will tell them. They'll get put on them. They'll leave the hospital and they say, "Oh, just follow with your outpatient doctor." And then the outpatient doctor goes, if the outpatient doctor is, wants to pull you off, and he's particularly, maybe not so happy about you being on these meds, he'll say, we really ought to get you off of these things. But many times they'll say things like, well, we really can't be sure that it wasn't like a schizophrenic episode or a bipolar episode. So it's probably a good idea to stay on it for at least 6 months. And that kind of covers their ass. It means that you're not going to fall to pieces, and, they're not going to get these phone calls to their office. But by the time, 6 months has now eclipsed, best case scenario, you've been able to stop smoking marijuana, but maybe you're still smoking it and you have that risk. I mean, the chances of you coming off of that time are much harder, because there is something called withdrawal. You can go into psychosis from withdrawal, and many doctors think you can just pull people off these meds in a couple of weeks. Halve the dose, take it every other day, stop. But that's really not how the brain works. I mean, after 6 months, your brain has fully adapted to the medications. If it's an antipsychotic, what that means is that drug has been suppressing dopamine neurotransmission, and so your brain is pushing against that, meaning that it's created more dopamine receptors. And if you pull the drug out too quickly, all of a sudden, because you had to regrow all these dopamine receptors to push against the effect of a drug that was squashing that, now they're all going to get hit with, the cannabis if you're using it, but also just the normal dopamine in your brain it's now on this kind of hypersensitized, exposed neuron that's going to throw you into a psychosis again. And now all of a sudden you just look like a crazy person. You look like you've always had bipolar or schizophrenia, because don't you see, we tried to remove the medication and it happened again. These tapers, when you want to get people off them safely, you have to stop the cannabis, and then you probably have to do it over several months, or 6 months, something like that. And for people who have been on these drugs for years, from what I'm seeing, it takes 1 to 2 years to come off in a way that doesn't trigger it. And so it's so easy to have one psychotic episode and then just get trapped in this system where whenever you try and come off, you have a withdrawal psychosis or withdrawal mood instability, and then that's just your lot in life, and you're kind of just stuck forever.
Have you ever seen psychosis induced from cannabis-related withdrawal? Do you think that's a possibility or a thing?
This is something I need to ask you about, Dr. Frank, is what you see happening in cannabis withdrawal, because it is one of the areas that I was never taught about. And honestly, I haven't actually done a lot of rehab work with cannabis, so I haven't seen it. But I'd love to get your like what does cannabis withdrawal look like for people? Is it long lasting? Is it short? Is it kind of varies between people? What do you see?
I think it varies between people, but I think it's one of the more longer lasting withdrawals. And I don't know if that's because it's stored in your fat cells. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's something with their endocannabinoid system, which connects to the brain and the gut, is so closely related. I don't know, but I think it's one of the longer lasting withdrawals that I've seen across the board from a lot of substances. As far as withdrawal inducing a psychosis, I can't say I've seen that, but I've had people where I've said, listen, you have to taper off of this substance. If they're using, I'll say, highly unregulated black market, I'll call it, cannabis products, which are rampant in the high schools, even among adults, they're rampant, these black market products. It becomes so confusing, because it's like, I don't even know that it's just cannabis that you're doing. Like, I don't even really know what's in that little cartridge of oil that you're consuming at this point. Pesticides, fungicides, this, that. I don't know if you feel bad from THC. I don't know if you feel bad because you have all this other crap in your body at the moment in your brain that's trying to process. But I have had individuals where they stop cannabis and the insomnia, let's take that for example, is so bad. I'm concerned that they're going to go into a psychotic episode just because of the insomnia related to the withdrawal, right? Because how many nights can you go without sleep before you're going to go psychotic? It can't be that many, right? What is it? Maybe two, 3 nights tops, and you're going to lose
I'd
your
say
mind,
most
right?
people after 3 nights will all say, I'm losing my mind. They're so anxious. they can't think straight anymore. Like they can't concentrate or focus on anything. And so they're just like, I'm losing my mind. You feel like you're going crazy by about 3 days easily. You've lost it.
And this is
Yeah.
where I get very stumped. And I'm
Yeah.
so happy to meet you on YouTube, because maybe there's more of a collaboration for us beyond YouTube, because this is then where it
Hmm.
gets tricky for me, because I'm then left to say, okay, whoa, 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 let's taper cannabis. If we can taper it, that's great. If you can still get some sleep with it and you're not going to lose your mind to be up, and we can just taper, 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 and then cut down. I've seen that be successful. But then I've had people where even that's not enough, because their tolerance has become so high because they consume cannabis at the rate that someone would smoke a pack of cigarettes, tapering, and they're not even in a mindset to taper. Like, the idea of tapering is just too overwhelming. And what winds up happening is the insomnia might get so bad. So now I'm saying, hey, go talk to your primary care doctor or a psychiatrist. And the primary care has no idea what to do with it in most cases. And this is where we have like a major problem. So I'll say this: I don't know that I've seen someone quit cannabis and then go into a state of psychosis. I have seen someone quit cannabis, be up for 3 days, and then go psychotic related to the insomnia withdrawal symptom. And that is something where I'm left with people, if they're primary or they don't have a psychiatrist or an addiction specialist that they can get in touch with, then we have a big problem on our hands. I don't know if I answered your
Yeah.
question or if you have any commentary on that, but
Yeah, I mean, I have commentary on that. I mean, I'm going to use an analogy to what I do over in my practice. I mean, I get a lot of people off antidepressants and benzos, but particularly drugs like Klonopin and Xanax. What we see with them is they make people sicker in the long run. And so um, some people who use these benzos long term, they will get incredibly anxious over time. They'll have memory problems, cognitive problems, and then they can get much worse if they fail a taper. And so I do think with those drugs, there's like this neurotoxicity that sets in. So when you long-term Xanax user, you just start to feel sick. Your drug is wearing off. It's not working. Why do I feel bad all the time? And really, what's happened is your brain has gone toxic on the drug. Now, here's the real problem. The only thing that you can do to get out of that is actually come off the drug at that stage. But if that drug has become your crutch for dealing with insomnia and for dealing with anxiety, you're kind of fucked, I hate to say, because it's just like it's like what do you do? I mean, you're essentially tasked. I mean, you were on this drug, it was it was helping with your sleep and insomnia. Now it's made you go neurotoxic, and so you feel terrible all the time, but you can't use it. And so these patients, and I look after them, but I have an incredibly structured program. We have groups that go on every day. We talk with family members. People come in and they just talk about how much they're suffering, how hard it is, and we have to just reassure them the whole time. This is the right thing to do. You need to keep on going. Come and check in with me tomorrow, because it is so distressing. People can't work during this; they're completely disabled. And so I also wonder if this is happening with some of your patients, because I do think cannabis harms the brain.
you're giving
Yeah,
me chills when you're talking, because this is exactly it. This is the
yeah,
one scenario where I'm sitting there saying, I don't know what to have to do, and I know that no one else really knows what to do either. And I
no,
know that when I'm talking to the person, so literally my default is just keep talking to me. Like, just stay in touch, keep talking to me. Let's keep going. If you need emergency services, we know that you're in a crisis right now. We can get that to you. But like, just talk to me, because I don't know what else to do at this moment. Because coming off is that's the only solution at the end of the day. Because being on it isn't going to work. You're going to be here anyways. So we only have one shot. It gave me goosebumps when I heard you saying this, and
yeah.
hearing you say like it's a really bad situation. I'm a smart guy, but in that situation, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what else
We
to do aside from talk through it.
and here's the thing, and here's the big problem where a lot of people will run into difficulties. The way we treat people in America, and I imagine the rest of the world, is we don't like patients like that. We like things that we can treat with medications. We like things where we'll just send them to the hospital. Well, in the hospital, they're just going to put them on more meds. And so the type of treatment these people need is constant reassurance. They need lifestyle interventions. How can we optimize your health? How can we get you moving? How can we get you in the sun? Like, how can we explain to your family what's happened to you, and that you can't just will yourself out of this state? And then you kind of have to help people grieve. Yeah, I mean, you're really sick at the moment. Something bad has happened, and don't worry, you'll get through it. I'll be here with you. And sometimes I'm doing this for like a year or two, honestly, until people get better. And no one likes to do this work. Therapists, counselors, doctors, they freak out because these people are like, I'm terrible. Like, what am I going to do? I'm so sick. And they just want to give them more and more medications. And that can make people worse. And so it's a terrible problem to have once you've had a brain injury from chronic substance use, because the only way out of it oftentimes is through hell. And it's bad for like a year, but it does end and it does get better, and your brains have tremendous capacity to heal. And you kind of need a team of people cheering you on and reminding you that there's hope.
I tell people often when they're in those scenarios, I've known two gentlemen who suffered from different things. One alcohol, and his liver failed and he was like in a coma for a very long time from alcohol. I have another friend who was abusing Ambien and Xanax, and he was taking Ambien during the middle of the day, mixing it with all these other drugs, also slipped into a coma and lost the ability to speak for a prolonged period of time. The guy with alcohol lost the function of his musculature. He didn't know if he'd walk again. And both of them are fully recovered. Like, you wouldn't know it talking to them today. And I love what you said about that. Like, things can get better, because I think of these two, which I was never in that state, but such extreme scenarios. And people are in extreme scenarios when they're going through this. And I'm like, hey, someone else has been here before, and there's a good chance the odds are in your favor. It's probably going to work out. Like, the human body is an incredible thing, right? The mind, the brain is an incredible thing. And I love that you said that, because that's when I'm talking to people who are in that moment. I'm like, hey, I had a friend who was in a coma for like months, and here he is. He's walking, he's talking, he's in the gym again, and against what seemed to be against all odds. So
Yeah.
this has been.
And I have a whole practice. I have a whole practice of them. My practice is people who have had brain injuries from psychiatric medications, severe ones that they've been completely disabled. They're in bed, and it does take time. Sometimes it can take several years, but these people are all trending in the right direction.
That's that's really fascinating. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? I don't want to. I'm sure at some point I'd love to have you again on in the future, and hopefully we continue our conversations between our two channels. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about cannabis-induced psychosis? From my end, this was all the questions I had for you at the moment.
Probably just to reiterate, I mean, I think the thing that I really wish people would understand is that it's not. These problems aren't things that just go away when you decide to stop smoking weed. And I think a lot of people think about it that way. Oh, if I don't feel so sharp, it'll get better when I come off. If I don't, if I have a psychotic episode or a mania, that's just fine. It's just time limited. We're taking drugs which are changing our brains and sometimes hurting them. And if the drug hurts your brain, it's not something that's going to go away when you stop taking it. It may take like a year or so, and until you start to feel yourself again. And then it's like you've fallen out of a second story window and hit your head really hard, and you have a severe concussion, and your mood is unstable, and you can't think right, and it can have an effect on all these areas of your life. And that's what I really wish people understood, especially if they're using it when they're young, or if they're using high potency cannabis products. Like, these things it's actually harmful to the brain. And so I'm gonna end on that note. That's what I think is really important.
And I'm just gonna follow up briefly. So people are like, what do you do with people when you're helping with people cannabis? Setting proper expectations is huge, because just to your point, if someone's quitting and they're thinking this is all going to reverse, and maybe they ran into financial trouble throughout substance use and social and relationship trouble and all these things, it's not going to reverse overnight. And if someone goes into it with the expectation there's a very high chance of a return to substance use, because they're let down on their expectations of what the healing time was going to be. And at multiple points throughout today's conversation, you gave me chills hearing what you had to say, because it's awesome talking to someone who's of a like mind and seeing what I see. It makes me feel more confident in
Yeah.
what I do. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
you're on the right track. And I mean, we're doing the same thing. I mean, I'm working mainly with legal drugs, but it's the exact same problem that we're dealing with. And the analogies hold between the different psychiatric drug classes, and it holds with things like cannabis, because after all, I mean, we're talking about just chemicals that alter the brain. I did have one more point, and that is
Please.
that the solution to the problems, like if you have a brain injury or neurological fallout following cannabis use, often if you are going to take psychiatric medications, you really want to use it on a as needed basis, because essentially you're just going to cause yourself another dependence. These are very individualized cases. Obviously, if you're really dangerous or unsafe or suicidal, you may need to be on it, but you want to avoid it as much as possible. The way you need to think about it is lifestyle modification, optimizing your health, giving your brain everything you need to heal, rallying your support systems around you so you can make it through that period. That should be the goal, not going to the family medicine doctor or the psychiatrist looking for an out, because that can lead to a whole bunch of other problems unless you really need it. And so, yeah, that's the last thought I have.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Dr. Yosef. I really appreciate your time today, and we will both be keeping an eye on the comments below. For anyone who enjoyed today's video, please, as Dr. Yosef requested, share your experiences, and please look at the links in the video description to learn more about taperclinic.com and Dr. Yosef's YouTube channel. And we will also put Every Brain Matters in there too, because we definitely need more exposure to that channel as well. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you.